Last night's debate, of course, was just part of the equation in South Carolina as the candidates gear up for this weekend's big primary vote. Now, there's some good news for Senator Bernie Sanders and some bad news for the presumed South Carolina frontrunner Vice President Joe Biden, even as he is being endorsed by South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn.
Biden's still in the lead, but Bernie Sanders is gaining on him with African-American voters. It's a huge voting bloc in South Carolina. Joining us now via Skype to talk about the buzz on the ground in South Carolina to give his take on last night's debate, Democratic strategist, great friend of the show, Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael, it's great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be back with you guys.
Absolutely. So, Michael, you're there on the ground in South Carolina. I know you haven't been to any events yet. You will be tonight or today and throughout the weekend. Tell us what you're looking for there on the ground. You know South Carolina quite well.
Yeah, so I want to see kind of what the tenor and tone is on the ground here. This is going to sound weird. I'm actually going to go to some Walmarts, go to some diners, kind of make my way around to a couple events and see what people on the ground are actually feeling. Clyburn just did his endorsement, and I think that's going to play a big part in Biden surging. And I think it's going to be interesting to see whether we see people on the ground actually feeling that same kind of level of excitement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our analysis here was that the debate last night probably more or less preserves the status quo. I never think Biden has an incredible performance, but I think he surpassed the bar that's been set for him. I don't think Bernie Sanders really was attacked in a way that was ultimately particularly effective. I also didn't think he did an amazing job, so I felt like the status quo more or less held, which probably benefits Joe Biden in the state of South Carolina and benefits Bernie Sanders overall. But what do you think?
So I think that some of the panic within the party is going to give Biden a little more boost than I think I did last week. I expected Biden to win by about 5 points last week. I actually think now he'll probably win by about 10. I think some of that's going to because people are going to, some of those votes that were going to go to Steyer are now going to go to Biden. And right. I think a small portion of some of Sanders' support is going to go to Biden as well, which I think will make the difference.
That's interesting, Michael, that you say that. We had a pollster on yesterday who was talking about how 40% of Steyer support comes from Joe Biden. The other 30% comes from Sanders. So that actually, that's a pretty good bump for Joe Biden if he effectively prosecuted that case. For all the talk, he did fine in the debate last night. It wasn't great. Probably one of his best performances. Do you think that's enough to put him up over the edge?
I do. I said before, actually, on your show, that I think the bar for Biden's performances is extremely low. So I think what normally would have been probably a B- performance for anyone else because of Biden's previous debate experience was kind of an A- performance for him. And I think people, especially in the more moderate, kind of older electorate like South Carolina, people are very worried about having Sanders at the top of the ticket. So they're looking for an excuse to be able to vote for Biden. I think Biden gave that out.
At the same time, you've got Bloomberg hanging out there. He's not going to be on the ballot in South Carolina, hasn't been on the ballot yet in any state. After last week's disastrous debate performance, he really plummeted in the polls, and certainly whatever momentum he had seems to be blunted. What does that mean for Biden's potential on Super Tuesday?
I think it's going to be interesting because, if you look at the polls, Bloomberg's doing well in North Carolina. He's doing well in Virginia, which is absolutely going to eat into Biden's numbers. But at the same time, I think Bloomberg's whole campaign has been based off of him being the emergency hatch for Biden. If Biden does well in South Carolina, then I think that kind of, and by well, he has to over. If he does, it wins by about 10 points. Then I think there's a question about whether or not people then vote for people like Pete Buttigieg or vote for people like Michael Bloomberg on Super Tuesday. So I think today's performance, or rather Saturday's performance, will really kind of dictate where we go and whether this race is earlier.
I agree with you, Michael. One thing I'm watching very closely is I just saw a poll come out of Texas. It shows that if Bloomberg was not in the race, right now Bernie and Biden are actually tied in the state of Texas, according to this poll. In my view, that actually puts Bernie up a little bit top just based on the performance he's had with Latinos throughout the contest so far. However, it would be 31-25 Biden if Bloomberg wasn't in the race. So he's still having a significant effect. If Biden does win South Carolina, you think he takes away a little bit some of that Bloomberg support heading into Super Tuesday?
I do, because I think Bloomberg's support's soft. I think, like I was saying before, I think people are supporting Bloomberg because they're nervous about Biden, not because they really like Bloomberg. I also think Texas has a more conservative Hispanic demographic and Latino demographic.
True.
And so I think a lot of those young Latinos who are going to go for Sanders may have, equally their parents may go for Biden. It all depends on kind of how things play out on Saturday.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a different population than sort of the Nevada Latino or California Latino population. Let me ask you this. Does Biden have a path to a majority of delegates at this point, or is all this game about just trying to keep Bernie Sanders from getting that majority?
I think it kind of depends. If he runs up the score in some of those southern states, then I think he could. The problem is going to be that I think Sanders is going to be really strong in California, which has such a huge amount of delegates. And then with so many people in the race, Klobuchar will do well in Minnesota. You're going to have Bloomberg do well in Virginia and in North Carolina. So at some point you run into the problem of, with a race this big, people are just going to start picking off delegates that are needed. And so I think...
And on the other hand, if Bernie does pull off the upset in South Carolina, which polls show is certainly within range, do you think that means the race is basically over?
Oh, I don't even think it's basically over. If Bernie wins South Carolina, this race is over. He's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party, and Democrats will have no choice but to coalesce around him.
There you go, Michael. Thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Great to see you. Have fun down there.
Take care.
Next, Rising Super Panel will tell us who they think won the debate, who needs to win South Carolina to stay in the game. That's when Rising continues.